Hello, we finished our obligation of 8 hours for the day. That's it. That's our quota. Anyways, join me now. I'm just waiting for the car to sort of warm up. And then we're going to go... Oh, perfect lighting. And then we're going to go discuss, should I get back to FPV? That's the topic for today. Let's go. Alright, so the two goals of today's video is not to cut as much as I want to, like a slice here and there just to get some parts out because I blabber on like this. And the second one is to hammer down my pros and cons of getting back into FPV. Let's jump into the trunk. Let's go. Alright, so on one hand you have FPV, the other hand you have camera drones. It stands for first person view. And essentially with FPV, you have the ability to immerse yourself into the flight using goggles and an onboard camera. These characteristics allow you to have a more worthwhile experience versus camera drones. Camera drone side, as you all are quite familiar with, is the stabilized shots. It's like the nice orbits, the circling, the pull-up, everything. That is camera drones. See, with camera drones, you have a gimbal that steadies or stabilizes all the video, and hence you're allowed to capture these amazing cinematic views of like your favorite locations, your favorite places, etc., etc. Okay, so I just wanted to interrupt. Well, I'm getting interrupted right now, but I just wanted to cut in because the other day when I was filming, it was mad windy and I was starting to edit it and I didn't enjoy listening to the audios. It was just full of wind noises. Today is a better day as there's not much wind. It is raining a little bit. It's starting to drizzle somewhat, and it's a better listening experience for you guys. So I thought I would just redo the pros and cons of getting back into FPV. FPV is an umbrella term. It's basically using goggles to see what a remote control device or machine is looking at. So you can do FPV trucks, you can do FPV RC cars, like the remote control cars, you can do FPV planes, you can do, in my case, it's FPV drone. So building on top of that, there's so many different types as they're all custom made to their own specific functions. So you got like cinematic drones, you got freestyle drones, you got race drones, you got hybrid drones that do a little bit of each thing. And there's so many more different configurations that you can make for FPV drones. So with all the different types of variations of FPV drones, there's really no end-all, be-all case for what an FPV drone is. As long as it flies and it does the specific task that you want it to do. So say you're into freestyle, which Brandon is, and as long as the drone can do all these acrobatic maneuvers and stuff like that, that is it. Oh, okay. So the second reason why FPV drones are also great to get back into, more speed. You already know, more speed equals more fun. That is the universal equation for any adrenaline sport, and with more speed you're able to do more acrobatic maneuvers. So you can do loop-de-loops, you can do actually they're called power loops, split S's, you know, all the fancy tricks that I hope to learn. But yeah, you generally get more speed from FPV drones than camera drones because the FPV motors have higher motor frequencies, which means they have greater RPMs that they can spin up to versus camera drones. As camera drones, they really need more milder, I would say, motors in order to keep the quad leveled and nice and have an enjoyable flight, so the camera and the gimbal doesn't have to work so much. But yeah, more speed equals more fun. That's the second point. Okay, the last pro of getting back into FPV is no sensors mean there's more ability to be able to fly recklessly as you want, but you know, we gotta keep it we gotta keep it tame. But essentially no sensors equals more ability to fly like in acrobatic mode, in full speed mode, all that kind of jazz. So generally on an FPV quad, sensors are like a no-go because they're seen as an encumbrance. Basically, they just add weight and they really have no functionality. If you have a sensor, if you're using a sensor on a drone, it's more so to protect the drone and really ensure that the drone keeps stable or in flight. With FPV, sensors are just basically add weight, and from what I gathered, if you add more weight, then that just makes your quad more heavier, and thus your batteries need to get bigger, and then, you know, down the rabbit hole you go, and you have to spend more money on bigger batteries, etc., etc. But either way, no sensors on the FPV drones are essentially a good thing, because it allows you to really hit like gaps that you wouldn't really hit with a camera drone. Like, say you see a narrow gap in the tree, with the camera drone you wouldn't really pursue that gap, because the degree of latency between your controller and the drone is much higher, so it's a smoother input, so you can get smoother movement. B, you just wouldn't, because like they're built for large aerial shots. With FPV drones, however, you see that little tiny narrow gap in the trees or between two signs, that's your calling. That's all FPV drones and drone pilots dream of. That narrow little gap in the wall, that's what they dream of hitting. Because A, there's no sensors to avoid that, and B, we have the speed, and C, we have the maneuverability. Okay, so with most things in the world, there's always a con to the pro of everything. One of the cons I've came up with in regards to should I get back into FPV is obviously cost. Everything has a cost, and FPV is no slouch. When it comes to FPV, the essential gear that you need is A, goggles, and they can be analog, digital. It's based on your preference. Mine's is digital, as I've experienced analog already, and I really don't like the hazy VCR lines that of course we all grew up watching tapes on. B, you need an RC controller, which you can scrape by with a cheap one, but like if you're gonna go into this all shebang, you might as well get a good one, right? Otherwise, you're just going to upgrade down the line and then throw more money, etc., etc. Last but not least, you need the quad itself. Essentially, you need to decide what drone you're getting, what's the purpose you need the drone for, and what style of filmmaking or whatever you're doing are you going to do with that drone. When you answer that question, that is when you can be able to really determine what kind of quad you want. Ooh, pretty colors. That means fall is upon us. Tell me in the comments below, is this your favorite time of the year, when the trees start turning colors and there's just luscious amount of like saturation within all the leaves, they're changing colors, etc., etc. Tell me below, is that your favorite time of the year? Actually, you know what? I did forget one essential gear that you do need, and is if you're gonna be flying FPV and you want to share what you see with the world in like quality, you're gonna need an external camera, because the camera on an FPV drone is not per se the most highest quality. It's more so used so that you can see where you're going. But that is why another key essential piece of gear that you need when you're considering an FPV setup is an external camera, such as a GoPro. What are the other ones? GoPro, any action cameras for that matters, or a 360 camera for that matters. So if you were to compare the costs of camera drones and the whole spec build out of an FPV setup versus the whole spec build out of a camera drone, the FPV drone wins in this category, because of course you got so many more components that you have to buy. It's just a lot more money. Building on the last point, oh fuck, okay, whoops, I just walked into a branch there. But building on the last point about cameras, as you may notice, the common trend is FPV drones like to stay light. You don't want a heavy FPV setup, as like what I said earlier, it just goes down the rabbit hole of spending more money to get better parts, etc., etc., etc. So following that theme, there are no gimbals whatsoever on an FPV setup. You're going to be relying on your ability to fly really nicely and stable. You're going to rely on EIS, which are electronic image stabilization software, which are built into like stuff like GoPro, software like RealSteady, Gyroflow, etc., etc. Those kind of softwares, they rely on electronic data in order to stabilize the footage for you, and they don't compare 100% to using an actual gimbal, as As with gimbals, you're more so inclined to get more stable shots. With electronic image stabilization, you get all this sort of like waviness and sometimes like some warping in the background, and it just doesn't look good sometimes. So it's a hit or miss with electronic image stabilization at this day and age. As well as having a gimbal on an FPV drone, aside from the weight concerns, is kind of redundant, as with FPV drones, you really want to do acrobatic maneuvers. You want to do maneuvers that camera drones just wouldn't dream of. So if you have a gimbal on a camera drone, how is it going to react when you do flips and rolls, etc., etc.? Motions like that, gimbals just don't really know how to handle. So having a gimbal on an FPV drone just doesn't make sense. The finale of the cons for me personally is technical knowledge. When you have a camera drone, right, and so it's a DJI most likely, when you have a DJI drone, you have everything sorted out for you. Everything works really well. Most oftenly, those drones are more sorted out, they're more fine-tuned, and they just work basically. If you have any problems, you send it back to DJI, they fix it, and you don't have to tinker with it, essentially. FPV drones, there's no manufacturer that you can send stuff back to. You have to tinker around with everything. So say one of your motors, say you crashed and one of your motors got damaged or burned out or whatever. You're gonna have to fix that somehow, whether that's buying a new motor and then learning how to solder that motor to the board. That's on you. The onus is on you to fix everything with FPV drones, which is the pro and con in its own self. As if you can fix everything, you don't have to pay somebody else to fix it, and thus you save money. Con, you need to know how to do that. Okay. So I asked you, did I make it convincing enough? Because I gave you 3 pros and 3 cons of should I get back into FPV. Let me know in the comments below which one should I do.